Well, I think that every single part of '70s rock and roll has been reinvented in the 2000 in the 1900 1990s and the 2000s. Um, Bands like the Gin Blossoms pretty much became the Byrds. You know, um, everybody kind of picked a band or a sound from that period and reinvented it. And so I think that when it came to Alice Cooper, somebody was going to reinvent Alice Cooper. So Marilyn did a version of it. I think Rob Zombie actually might have done a closer version. I think if I were going to pick a camp to be in, I would be in Rob Zombie's camp only because it has more of a sense of humor to it. And Rob has got I think, more of a carnival. I always said Rob's show and music looks like a tattoo come to life. It's like a huge tattoo that's just gone crazy. But I think that I'm probably closer to him. There are a lot of bands. There's a new band called Sinistar that's definitely got a lot of Alice influence. I hope that my influence, though, is not just the makeup and this. I would hope that the influence is make your lyrics come to life. If you're going to write a song called "Welcome to My Nightmare," well, give the audience the nightmare, and don't just kind of do it. Spend time, spend the money, learn how to produce it in front of an audience so that they walk away going, "Wow, that was something to see." I've seen Rob's show. I've seen tape of Marilyn's show. The only thing I don't like about Marilyn's show is it leaves you on a very down a down. Kind of leaves you on a really kind of out there on a limb. I like to leave an audience with confetti in their hair. I like to leave them so that it's a party. So when they walk away, yeah, sure, Alice got his head cut off. Sure, a giant baby attacked him and chewed his arm off, and he had to, all this stuff happened up there. But in the end, there were huge balloons, and it was a party, and Alice was in a white top hat and tails, and school's out, and everything's okay, and what a great party. To me, you have to leave an audience on an optimistic view, or you send them away with a real bad taste in their mouth. You send them away irritated. I want them to be sent away satisfied. Well, I've finally got to the point in my career where it used to be in the '70s when we would put an album out. You would put an album out a year, maybe two, because that was just the way it was. You would go in, do your album, go out on tour, and while you were on tour, you were writing the next album, and it was just a series of albums. And you were establishing yourself as a rock and roll band, a volume of work, so that people would come to their show and they go, "Oh, I know that song's from the second album. I know that song's from the first album." 25 albums later, I always wanted my albums to be an event, not just an album. And I always kind of fancy myself a storyteller anyways. There's such a glut of music out there now that I didn't want to just do 12 more rock and roll songs and throw them on the heap and say, okay, here's more music, here's more stuff, here's more. I always want Alice's albums to be a story, a moral, something that's going to make you think, something that's going to leave you with something. The Last Temptation was a really strong statement. It was talking about how you don't have to buy into what the world sells. For kids, you don't have to get high. You don't have to have sex when you're 12. You don't have to do all the things the world tells you have to do. You have a choice, and at the same time, you have. If you're a real rebel, you don't buy into it. So anyways, it was a great story around it, and there was a Marvel comic around it, and there was 3 comics around it, actually. And it was a production. Yeah, it really made sense. But when, it took 6 years to write Brutal Planet. Not 6 years to write it. 6 years for it to come into fruition, where a year ago I went, I got this idea for something futuristic. I was being affected by the news. I was being affected by. I read a lot of newspapers and magazines, and I watch CNN a lot, and I get a feel of what's going on out there in the world. What's the attitude of the world right now? I see the world getting really irritated. I see the world getting really close on a hair trigger. And what's irritating is the fact that I find that we're treating life very cheaply. We're treating everything very cheaply. We're treating morality very cheaply. And I think that it's the fact that we just want everything now. We want it now. We want information now. We want sex now. We want this now. And we're losing the romance. Snapshot of the future. You really don't want to go where Alice showed you tonight in this show. This is a place where everything is nuked out. Technology has eaten itself. It's not our friend anymore. Technology now is like half man, half, like the controller. He's only half there, and he's a mutant. What I'm seeing is, I'm a very optimistic person, but who I write for, Alice, is very pessimistic. And his point of view is much more fun, because he portrays a place that's a much nastier place. And of course, that portrays a better stage show for me. Wicked Young Man was almost a hard song to write. And I'll tell you why. Because Wicked Young Man has a line that says, I've got a pocket full of bullets and a blueprint of the school. That was a very rough line to write. But I couldn't ignore the line. Here's a portrait of a serial killer. Here's a portrait of a kid that he has no redeeming qualities. Zero. And he started out being a futuristic character, but he's not. He's with us right now. My job on that song was to not condone what he does, but to expose him. He's out there. He was in Columbine. He's in a lot of our schools, that kid is. He's a product of hate. He's a product of a lot of things. But I make the point in the song that it's not the music I listen to, it's not the videos I play, it's not the movies I see. I'm just a vicious young man. And I think that you have to lay evil where evil comes from. It comes from a darker place, not just your normal place. I believe in a classic God and a classic devil, and I believe it comes from a classically evil place. So the 99.9% of those kids that listen to the same music, the same videos, the same movies, don't kill people. This one guy is a psychopath. He's a sociopath. So, that's who we're talking about. And then the song is warning people about him. I wasn't being insensitive, though, about that line. I think that line is very powerful because it's true. I hope people hear it in the right context. I hope they don't think that I'm trying to condone it. I'm not. I'm not trying to glorify it. I'm trying to absolutely expose it. Pessimistic is good because it's about him. Brian is one of the great pessimists of all time. Brian Nelson. He put together the box set. He's the world's greatest Alice Cooper fan, and he's one of the world's great pessimists, and I admire that because he's consistent. And so when I wrote the song Pessimistic, I originally started writing it, I am so absolutely pessimistic of psychics and of people that are into this whole thing. Well, your boyfriend is cheating on you. These ads on TV. That's more phony to me than some of the Christian preaching I see on TV. And I'm a Christian. I'm admitting a lot of your TV preaching is really the same thing as this psychic crap. But what I'm saying is pessimistic had to be written in here. And then the shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. That's dedicated to Brian. My little girl, my 7-year-old girl always says, I don't like that song because you told me not to say shut up. Take It Like a Woman is part 2 of Only Women Bleed. And I admit it. Yeah, Only Women Bleed in the 70s was written, and it was a softer song, and it was suggesting that women get the rough end. Women do take a lot more than men do. When I wrote Take It Like a Woman, I loved the title so much, Take It Like a Woman, because I realized that women do take more pain than we do. They can take more physical pain than men. They can take more emotional pain than men. We really are remiss saying take it like a man. It's really take it like a woman. They're much tougher than we are in a lot of ways. In this case, though, on Brutal Planet, she doesn't just get beat up, she gets killed. Because everything is amplified on Brutal Planet. It's a pretty song, but you realize at the end of the song that he's singing it from her grave. She's not just a beaten woman, she's a dead woman, because she took it too long. I think Alice Cooper is now public domain, part of the public. He's a household name. He's a household word. And that's nice to be. I am not limited to just a teenage audience, even though I get my huge percentage of my audience is teenage. The teenagers are very good at their history, and they're very good at their rock and roll. When they go into stores, they'll see Nirvana, and they'll see Soundgarden, and they'll see, all these new bands and everything. And they include Alice Cooper, Ozzy Osbourne, and Aerosmith right in with those bands, even though we are classic rock. It doesn't mean, though, all of us are 52 years old, but we're making albums as vital as anything we've ever made. We're kind of a unique age group. I mean, what I did tonight was more vital than anything I did 20 years ago. So I don't think the age thing means anything, but I think that my age group out there, my demographics, I go from 12 years old to 50. People bring entire families to my show. There was never anything in my show that was ever anything a kid couldn't see. There's no nudity. There's no bad language. There's no, if you really go back through the history of Alice Cooper, none of that ever was in my show. Yeah, I think they'll love it because basically it's a lot of illusions, it's a lot of rock and roll, and it's a lot of attitude. When you hear your record on the radio, and it's just the biggest buzz of all time. When we heard 18 on CKLW, we went, geez, I can't even believe we got to play. We were so used to getting turned down that when 18 got on the radio, we just looked at each other and went, this is unbelievable. And it was like a pick hit. 2 days later, it was in the top 5 requests. For about 3 weeks after that, it was number 1 request. Went to number 1 on the charts. And we could not believe it. Every time I turned the radio on, it was on. And CKLW was massive. We were talking about a huge, it went to everywhere. So we had a hit. And, that's when you really realize that something's going on. Suddenly all the offers start coming in. Because everybody knew we had the show. We just didn't have the record. When the record hit, oh man, this was like a license to kill for us. Because, now we actually had money to do what we wanted to do. Before we were building our own props, we were back there building the guillotine on a Saturday. We weren't pop stars. We were, I'm still like that. I still like to come down and work on the show. I don't think anybody can. I think you'd have to go pretty far to shock an audience, because I think the audience is basically shock-proof. When Columbine happened, when Kosovo happened, when you're seeing basically murder on television, when in the last 10 years, what I went back to is life has got so cheap that what I do on stage is, in the 70s, was shocking. Now, it's not. I can't think of anything you could do that would match CNN. I've seen some of the most shocking footage in my life. And the thing that makes it so shocking is because it's real. It's not phony. It's not Stephen King. It's not Alice Cooper. It's real. The guy picking up his bones and putting it in a pillowcase. The song we did tonight, that was on CNN. I got that directly from CNN. That was real. So I don't think, I'm not even in the business of shock. I don't even try to shock an audience. I try to entertain the audience. And I think shock was dead mid-70s. So many. This could be a book, First of all, Alice Cooper has never been a devil worshiper. I came from a great Christian background. My father was a pastor. My grandfather was a pastor. My father-in-law is a pastor, and I go to church. I'm a Christian. I every once in a while some vacation Bible school, something like that, and I go to Bible classes. But that doesn't mean I can't rock and roll. because I think my message is very strong. And, I still believe that my show is very valid. I'm not going to go up there and beat you over the head with the Bible, though. I mean, that's not my job to do that. My job's to entertain you. But I think that when you listen to my lyrics, you're going to hear something that's positive in my lyrics. I'd try to be. But I'm not going to back down on the show. I think the show needs to be like that to make it effective. So the whole devil worship thing, if anything, on this album especially, I warn against that. I warn against inviting Satan into your life, because he's there, and he can't wait to come in. And he's not going to come in and go with horns and a little pointed tail. He's going to come in and be the most appealing character you've ever met in your life, and that's why he's so effective. I've always heard this Frank Zappa taking a crap on stage, or me taking a crap on stage and somebody else eating it. And I've heard that rumor, but I heard that rumor when I was in high school about Elvis and Ricky Nelson. That's one of those urban legends that just kept coming down the pipe, and it just changes names. I heard it was Iggy. I heard it was Rod Stewart. I heard it was Alice Cooper. I heard it was Rob Zombie and Marilyn Manson. It's one of those interchangeable rumors. Keith Richards and his blood, or there's always the Richard Gere thing. I'm still not buying into any of that. Bob Ezrin. Without Bob Ezrin, we would not be here. Bob Ezrin was he was our George Martin. He was the one that took a raw rock and roll band that had a great show, but no significant musical sound at all. We were a good psychedelic hard rock band, but no sound. He took us and reinvented us in a barn in Detroit. We went into a barn, and he just started from music 101. Okay, we're going to start all over. We're going to invent a bass sound. We're going to invent a guitar sound. We're going to invent an Alice voice. We're going to take what you have naturally, and we're going to milk it. We're going to invent a sound for you guys. We're going to take all this crap that's on top of your music and build it from the bottom. And if you listen to Pretty's for You and Easy Action, two good psychedelic albums. When you listen to Love It to Death, it's classic Alice. It's the first time anybody really ever heard Alice Cooper. It had Dwight Fry on it. It had 18. It had Isn't My Body. It had Hallowed Be Thy Name. These songs were like, people heard it and finally went, that's what Alice sounds like. So Bob Ezrin was essential, the most essential member of our band. People always ask me, what's your favorite Alice record? School's Out is always going to be our anthem. That's going to be the one that's the anthem. Luckily, we had a couple anthems. 18 was an anthem. Elected was an anthem. But School's Out will always be our anthem. My Generation will be the Who's anthem. And, Satisfaction will be the Stones. I mean, everybody gets one. Stairway to Heaven will be Led Zeppelin. We're lucky enough to get one ourselves. But if I were going to pick one song that was going to represent the Alice sound, I would say Ballad of Dwight Fry. Because not only has it got the big power Alice feel to it and that voice, it's really got the theater involved, built into it. So Ballad of Dwight Fry to me is the essential Alice song. If I were going to put a song or two songs in a time capsule to represent Alice Cooper, it would be School's Out and Ballad of Dwight Fry. Yeah, and theater, just pure theater. I mean, we used West Side Story in the show. I mean, we went as far as to go to a legit Broadway show like West Side Story and inject it into our show. And it took a lot of audacity, to take a legit show like that and rock it out. Most kids had never heard of West Side Story. They'd heard the songs, but they had never seen the play. They'd never seen the movie, And I felt it's my job to introduce them to this. This is great, Our band had a very unique thing about it. We could not sit down and jam with Canned Heat, a blues band, but we could jam with Pink Floyd. Now, early Pink Floyd, and we actually even lived together for a while. The two bands did. Um, the my band was much more way out there. I mean, we all had rock and roll influence and Yardbirds and things like that, but we felt much more comfortable in the Frank Zappa area. We felt more comfortable in the Pink Floyd area, in that kind of experimental rock and roll. And so it was unique that Mike Bruce and Glenn Buxton was like, married to his Echoplex. When it came to a guitar solo, it was all this effects and crazy, insane things going on like this. Mike Bruce was the guitar player, sort of the real solid guitar player. Dennis Dunaway's bass had such a personality that there are bass players today that, I mean, they have shrines to him. They always go, Dennis Dunaway is like one of the most unique bass players of all time. We wrote 10 songs based on his bass guitar lines. Neil Smith was the ultimate. One other drummer in the world that was a better stage drummer. Keith Moon. Keith was like the greatest of all time, I would say. He was the Babe Ruth. Neil Smith, though, was 6'7", and he'd put high heels on, and he had hair down to his waist, and he would wear sequins and blue eye makeup. And he would call up Keith Moon and find out how many drums Keith had, and Keith would say, I have 36. Neil would go out and buy one more, so we had 37. Neil would get on stage. He was the epitome of ego. Rock god ego. And I'll tell you what, nobody sold it as good as him. And I just loved his sense of humor behind it. He knew that he was this bigger-than-life character, and he milked it. To me, he was just wonderful on stage. Well, the thing about Glenn was that all of us, Glenn was our buddy. Glenn was the first musician really in the band. He was the first one that really could play. And we all got him in the band because he was the guitar player and he could actually play all these Beatles songs in high school. But he wasn't like us. Glenn was a juvenile delinquent. Glenn was Keith Richards, the Arizona version. Glenn was always smoking. He was always getting in fights. He was always getting thrown out of school. Whereas we were all lettermen. We were all guys that were like, pretty good students. All-American kids, a little twisted sense of humor, but Glenn was the guy that was always, hey, come on, let's see what we can get away with here. He was one of the Bowery Boys, When everybody stopped drinking, when everybody stopped smoking cigarettes, when everybody stopped doing all the things that we did in the 70s, like I stopped 18 years ago. I haven't had a drink in 18 years or anything at all. Glenn just kept going. That wasn't part of Glenn's life to stop. So when I saw Glenn a year, maybe 6 months before he died, maybe a year, in Iowa, I was 48, 49, 50 years old, something like that. And I was in top shape. I mean, I was been on the road for a year, and I mean, I was cut. I looked like a middleweight boxer. And I felt great. Glenn came on the bus. I didn't recognize him. It was this little old man. He was about 75 years old. He was the same age as me. Smoking. He smoked 4 packs a day. Drank 2 6-packs a day. And you could see how it ravaged him. It just ravaged his body. And he got on the bus, and I just went, oh, Glenn, nobody's going to ever talk you out of it. I know you two. He's my best friend. He was one of my best friends. I drank with him. I did everything with Glenn. For years. He was my guy. But there was, you always feel like there's a time when you got to pull out. And you got to start thinking about your future. You got to think about your life. You got to think about your body. Everybody did that except Glenn. And it really... So nobody was really very surprised. It was like when Jim Morrison died. We all knew Jim real well. We drank with Jim. We sat there and we could stay with Jim for a while, and then he would, keep going. And there was never a point of if he was going to die. It was when. So when Jim died, and I got a call, hey, Jim died in Paris. I wasn't, what? It was, Who won the pool? I mean, it was one of those things. I mean, and Jim knew it too. Jim knew he was going to die young. We all knew it. Well, I had a real battle because what happened was I took my whole image of Alice Cooper and all the success there was a formula. I would write the album. I would write the album with lyrics that were designed to be on stage. That always worked. Writing the albums, writing the hits were not that hard for me. I was very lucky. I got to work with really good writers. So that part of the formula. Then I would put it on stage and I would bring it to life visually. Another part of the formula. I'd put on the makeup, put on the stuff, put on the image. I knew how to talk to the press. That was all together. And then it was topped off with none of those things were ever done without a drink. I drank before I put my makeup on, drank before I wrote a song, drank before I did an interview, drank before I did the show. I was in a constant buzz. So when somebody says, I'm going to take this part of the formula away from you, I immediately thought, well, you just knocked the blocks off from under me. I can't do anything now. Well, I was totally wrong. In all reality, I did better interviews then. I did better shows. I wrote better songs. I was in physically better shape. But I'll tell you what, the very first time I went on stage, sober, as Alice Cooper, I was terrified because I had never played Alice straight. And I got up on stage and I went, what if I get up there and he doesn't show up? What happens if I get up here and no Alice? And I'm just up here by myself. What happened was I got up on stage and invented a new Alice. The old Alice was sort of a hunched-over victim. He was a victim of everything. The new Alice was this very arrogant, shoulders back, spine straight up, egotistical monster that the audience actually liked better. They actually liked this new character, Alice. He was like the second generation Alice, and he was in charge. He wasn't the victim. He was the perpetrator. He now took the audience by the throat and says, come here, you're mine. And they went, okay, take us away for 2 hours. Mm-hmm. It's your trip. Let's go. And it's always been my deal. Escapism. Take them with you. But I mean, there was a point when the old Alice died. The new Alice rose up, and it was a new Alice.